Our conversation with Julia Samuel, and I love Julia. I think she's been one of the core faculty in Oxford for the last 3 years and will continue to be so. Her years of expertise working with probably some of the most horrendous situations for families when families lose a child. When we were talking to her, I was really struck by how important that role is, but also how difficult it must be to sit with parents who have lost children.
If we think about grief, which is still so largely underrepresented and a bit of a taboo, to be honest, her discussion and narrative around that is really fascinating. And as we approach Christmas, a time where grief hits differently, we look at how to embrace the experiences. It gives you a new lens on grief and how to show up in those moments.
The conversation really offers practical tools of how to get through moments like Christmas and just also moments of grief, which I think is really important for anyone who is struggling with grief, either at Christmas or at any time.
Let's dive in. Julia, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure many of our listeners will recognise your name, but for anybody who's new to Spain, and just to remind those that might need it, can you just start by introducing yourself and your work before we go on to the lion's share of the conversation today, which is how you relate to the field of trauma, mental health and wellbeing?
Well, it's lovely to be here and to be with you both. And I am a psychotherapist. I've been a psychotherapist for about 36 years. I started my psychotherapist work really in the NHS, where I was for 25 years, at St Mary's, where I supported families who had babies and children that died. And during that time, I became founder patron, helped establish and launch the charity Child Bereavement UK. And I'm still founder patron, but I about 5 years ago, I stepped down in a very active role where I was teaching doctors and very involved in all the fundraising and the work of Child Bereavement UK. And then I wrote some books from 2017, Grief Works, This Too Shall Pass, and Every Family Has a Story. And I have an app, the Grief Works app. I sound like a little machine. And I have a column for the Times Lux, where I'm their agony aunt. And that's about it.
So tell me a little bit more about where you started then. You started in St Mary's, working with families and families who had lost children specifically, or just
Babies.
babies.
No. So, I mean, if I go a step back, I was brought up in a family that had, literally therapy wasn't a word that I had ever heard or knew about. Therapy was I didn't know any therapists. I didn't know it was a job. I think I probably knew there were psychiatrists, but I was genuinely incredibly ignorant. But both of my parents had very significant losses before any of us 5 children were born. So my mum was an orphan by the time she was 25. Her mother, her father, her sister, and her brother were all dead, all very traumatically. And my father, his and his brother died very traumatically by the time he was about 28. So there were these very significant unvoiced losses that kind of permeated my childhood, but I wasn't really conscious that they had such a big impact. We were surrounded by these black and white photographs of my aunt, who I kind of knew wasn't as good at sport as my mother, but I didn't really kind of clock that she was dead. Because they were the generation who, kept going and carried on and multiplied. And so my mum had 5 children. I was one of 5, 2 sets of twins. I'm a twin with a twin brother, and I got twin sisters. So there was 5 of us in 4 years.
Wow.
That was so that was quite a lot. And so it was unconsciously, I found myself going towards volunteering. I worked with something called the Westminster Bereavement Service, training in the evenings, working in the church there, and going voluntarily into people's apartments, kind of. And so I started that when I was about 28. And that led me strangely to an interview at St Mary's, where I was surrounded like 14 doctors in a row. And I think I was just 30, offering to do this job of supporting. At that point, it was just mothers really who had babies that died. So stillbirth, neonatal deaths. And I don't know what I said. I don't remember anything about it. I do remember what I wore, which was a flowery dress with a belt. And I remember it was a summer's day. And I had the job, and I started in that September, and I was paid £25 a week.
Oh my gosh.
And I was put in a room that had no window, quite a lot of medical equipment, and a kind of flashing, what's it like? What are those lights called?
Neon
Strip light. And so that's how I started. And over time, I kind of built the relationship with the maternity team, and then I was taken on by the intensive care unit, the pediatric intensive care unit, PICU, and then the neonatal. So then I was supporting all families. So it could have been suicides of a teenager, drowning, road traffic accidents, babies that died a few days after birth for no apparent reason. Meningitis was a big thing. Falling down the stairs. I mean, there isn't a way a child or young person can die that I haven't worked with. And I did that every single week for 25 years.
Wow.
That seems like some seriously difficult work, like for a young woman who hasn't
Mother.
a young mother who hasn't had like a lot of, didn't really know what therapy was, and then to go into something that is where you've got serious trauma, serious I don't know, pain is what you'll have. How did you cope with that as a young mother?
I mean, I was trained, so I did a lot of training. So I got that job after my first kind of 3-year training, and then I did another 3-year training. I think in a way it was blissful ignorance, because I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I think what enabled me to be effective was my presence. I didn't really know about trauma. I'd read about Babette Rothschild, actually. And I'd learned everything I could about baby death and read every book that I could. But really, I think the learning for me, and I would be interested with other therapists, the learning gives you a kind of internal scaffold that you can test what's going on in front of you with this person to kind of, does this feel, am I feeling this right? Is this familiar? But it doesn't really train you how to sit with someone in extreme pain.
No.
That is uniquely, you have to find your own level of attunement, how you work with someone, how you respond to them, when you do an intervention, when you step back, when you allow them space to kind of be frozen, when you kind of gently nudge them to let them know that you can see that they're frozen, and that you can be beside them in it. That's instinct, which is what I worked on for years, probably. But also, I think for me, I think the thing that I'm really good at is listening. I'm a really good bloody listener, and I've always been a good listener. And I think when people feel heard, it is not, rocket science, but really properly being heard, particularly over something like a traumatic and sudden death, that there is no fix. There is nothing anybody can say. And I start every session with, I'm devastated this has happened to you. And, we both know that there's nothing that's going to make this better, but I want to support you through it. And but also I think being a twin, funnily enough, uh, I'm good at connecting. I think I'm instinctively good at connecting. So I think, if you're twins in utero, your toes and your fingers and everything are pressed up against each other. Your nose is pressed up against each other. So I'm always looking for connection, always. It's like in my system, I look to move towards. But also I pick up what's coming from the other person to see when I need to step back a bit, when I need to create space. And I think that is from being a twin and also being in a family of 5 children. On the age of 4, you kind of pick up signals quickly. But I feel so grateful to St. Mary's that they were like the mother and father of my professional self. I knew all the doctors. I developed debriefing for doctors. I developed a service for bereaved families, a remembrance service. I went on their ethics committee. I became an Imperial College fellow, and I taught them for years and years. So I was kind of taken in by them and developed, and then the same with Child Bereavement UK. I started that 2 years after I was at St. Mary's with Jenny Thomas, who's the founder. And again, you just sort of learn from your mistakes and learn going into hospitals, learn what's missing. Because the thing that I learned at St. Mary's that I wanted to make a difference in the world with Child Bereavement UK is you can't change what happens to you, but you can change the support that you get at the time and afterwards. And that is the predictor of your outcome for sudden and traumatic death. That if you have a baby that dies, that you go in with a healthy baby and they die in utero, not seeing the baby, not holding the baby, not having the opportunity to say goodbye to the baby, not having the chance for the baby to maybe come home and be in the cot that was meant for them, not for other members of the family to see the baby, not talking to the siblings about the baby. All of those choices, parents need to make informed decisions. Lots of hospitals 35 years ago didn't do anything. Miscarriages, the babies were taken away and put in with, the babies were just taken away.
And how did you know? Was that learning that you kind of saw over the 25 years that you were there, that these were choices, all of those choices? You just said a number of different options. Some of them I was thinking, God, I'm not sure that I would want to do that or do that. But was that those things?
I learned from families, listening to families.
Yeah.
So my main informant was listening to families, to thousands and thousands of bereaved people, but also listening to doctors and also going around the country and teaching in hospitals all over the country in maternity units. So we developed a training for the Royal College of Pediatrics and RCPCH, Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health. And we got it finally that it was a requirement that all paediatricians, because when I started, no paediatrician had any training how to tell someone their child was going to die, that they had a level 4 tumour and they had 3 months to live. They had no training whatsoever.
That's an amazing legacy that you've done that.
And so now that it's required learning, and we developed the day with the RCPCH that we launched at St. Mary's. And then we went around the country doing it, and I'd get a bereaved parent to come and speak. I'd do a kind of debrief for them as doctors. We'd do a role play. It was a really good training day, and it's still a really good training day. And so people kind of have the confidence to say the thing that is the most difficult thing in the world to say. Imagine saying to 2 parents that your child is not going to live or your child has now died.
No, I couldn't think of anything worse.
And you go into this business to make people better because you're a doctor.
I think that explains to me how you were able to, that length of tenure. It's that legacy piece. It sounds like the continual test and learn and implement, and the feedback loop that you so eloquently described from the very people whose, none of us even want to imagine being in that situation to
Unbearable.
kind of create the environment that they most need, but with your attunement, with that ability to kind of sit with them in those. I mean, I'm sat here almost struggling to kind of contribute because it's just I could feel it in my body. What we're just describing, I think we've all also got, if not direct and indirect experiences of child loss. And it's just it's like people don't talk about it because it's so painful, but
It's
like, and
unbearable.
it's a bit like, we talk about advocating for trauma training within the medical profession at every level, so that people have got an understanding when people are presented in front of them how to reckon. It seems like you walk that path in this process, and everything you described. I knew somebody who lost a baby very late in pregnancy, and they took great comfort in things that did, Minty, you said that felt very alien, but they took great comfort in some of those rituals, some of those moments.
Be able to parent their child.
Yeah.
From the moment of the diagnosis to the moment of the death, you make decisions and have memories that you will go back and live off for the rest of your life. From the moment of the death to the funeral, you then have other incredibly significant decisions that you can never undo, that will either haunt you and derail your grieving process or support you and be consoling because you felt you made the best decision that you could at the time.
And how do you then help people inform that decision? Because I imagine it's a state in which I mean, I guess a lot that might be around intuition and feelings, but how do you possibly not, you can't put aside that grief, but in that moment of profound feeling, navigate those choices and move forward, on that path that nobody wants to walk? How do you help them in that moment decide what's right for them?
So, I mean, a lot of the training I did with the doctors about communication was lowering their helping to regulate them. So I'd give them an exercise where they'd squeeze everything and release, and then squeeze and release and breathe, which took like 2 minutes, so that they were then down regulated and had enough window of tolerance to be able to connect to the devastated parent. So that, and it's the cadence of your voice, speaking slowly, but first of all listening to the family. So it's how you begin the conversation. Tell me, where you are now. What are you thinking about now? What's on your mind now? And then if you treat the parent as an expert, you're an expert, the parent is an expert on their child, themselves, their family, their culture, what's important to them, their values, their beliefs. And you're the expert on the prognosis or the medical establishment, what is necessary, because if it's a sudden death, there has to be a postmortem, all the different kind of regulations. And I teach them to work together, attune with each other. But you start by building trust. So you have to slow down. So how you communicate in that most heightened time makes all the difference. And doctors often go in, they haven't looked at the name of the person, they haven't seen the name of the child, they haven't slowed themselves down, they haven't read the notes properly. They go in and they kind of say, well, what's happened to you? Well, then you've lost them at that point. And so you have to be informed, you have to slow down. And my big thing in hospitals is there's this haste with the trauma of it to kind of get the baby or the child out and the family out. But actually what they need is very precious time that they will never have again. Are they going to take footprints and handprints? Are they going to bathe the child? Are they going to dress the child? Are they going to get the siblings to come in and be with the child? Are they, all of these things that are so crucial for the rest of their lives. Literally for the rest of their lives. They will think about that 4 hours or that 6 hours or the time they didn't have will haunt them. So it's really, I feel like I'm back in my seat at Child Bereavement UK when I was teaching this and lecturing and talking all the time. So, and I haven't been doing that so much at all. But
It's so important, and as I said, it's such a legacy. But I'm also really interested in, from hearing you and how you're talking about it now, it seems like it's a really relational thing that you were doing, and you had to be really attuned, and you kind of, in everything you said. And yet, I know that you've created kind of this GriefWorks app, for example, that anyone can access. And I really would be interested in how have you managed to translate all of that 25 years plus now, because there's more years that you've worked in other things since that into something that can be applicable, that people can, it's accessible to people, but that doesn't require what you're obviously brilliant at, which is this kind of attunement and the relationship. How does that work, and how have you translated that?
so the basis of it was, I was really sad to leave St. Mary's. Should I tell you the reason I left St. Mary's?
Yeah.
They took my room away. So I was given that shitty room at the beginning with no thing. And then I was given another quite not a very good room. Then I was given a room with a window. Okay. So I had a room with a window that had its own back stairs, very grotty, but back stairs. So no one had to go through the rest of the hospital to come and see me. So they didn't have to see other babies, hear other children or anything. They could come up. And then, for reasons that no one could explain to me, my office was taken away. They'd already taken away. I mean, this is about real estate in hospitals. And so I do understand it from a kind of management point of view. But I had got someone to sponsor and decorate a room where bereaved families could go and be with their dead child or their dead baby. And it was beautifully done. The man and the husband, the man and wife the parents could be there together with their child for 24 hours. It was really beautifully done. And I came 1 month and the room had been turned back into a medical office. No one had told me. They'd taken everything out. So that was the first thing. Then about 5 years later, I was told that my room had been moved and it was downstairs in a corridor, which was incredibly noisy, and back in a room that was full of medical equipment, where you could hear all of the hospital traffic. And I was working with families where someone had died by suicide, a boy had been killed on a bicycle, someone else had drowned in the bath. I mean, it was just, and I just thought, I love this hospital, the people, I love my lanyard, my NHS lanyard. I've still got it downstairs. I sort of kiss it. I loved it so much. It was that thing of belonging, and it beeped me through doors. And I felt so proud to carry it. It makes you cry. 25 years, I was part of it. And, but when they took my room away, I just thought, I can't do this. I've done it too much. It's too brutal now.
But what a loss to all of it. I mean, it just strikes me that the whole infrastructure and the management of that inspired that another loss, which is you in the context of that, in that role and that curation of that service, which is, like you say, life defining for people whose lives have been totally shattered apart. Yeah, so so how did that transition? So now we understand that transition. How did that inform then the next stage of his career?
So then I really I kept a very small private practice when I was in the NHS, but then I really liked seeing people privately, that I had my own kind of schedule. But I went on Desert Island Discs, and someone listened to me and said, "Do you want to write a book?" And I said, I never want to write a book. It's like homework forever. I'm one of the few people in the world that literally the last thing I ever want to do is write a bloody book. I've got nothing to say. It's all been said. No. And she said, she's called Felicity Rubinstein. She said, "Come and meet me for coffee." I went, "Okay, I'll meet you for coffee." So I met her for coffee, and she was really lovely. And she said, "Listen, you probably won't write a book, but why don't you do a proposal? Because a proposal is quite short. And if you don't get a decent offer, then there's no point doing a book." And I went, no, I'm not going to. And for 6 months, I didn't do anything. And I literally woke up one morning at the beginning of the August holidays. And I thought, I'm mad. I've got to write this proposal. So I wrote it between 5 and 8 in the morning, every morning for a month. And I sent it in. I got a really nice editor to come and help me, and she helped me. And I sent it in, and Felicity worked on it. And then about 2 months later, it went out, and there was a bidding war. There was like 10 publishers wanting it. And so then that got me out in the world.
And I think, and how, so I'm still fascinated about how you've managed to translate what, as I said, it's like a
Okay, I haven't answered your question.
No.
So, I mean, the app works because there are little 15-minute videos in every session of the course. So, and there are like 40 tools, and they're like meditations that are my voice.
Yeah.
And then there are webinars twice a week, some with me, some without me. But with me, they build a relationship with me in webinars through my voice in the app. And then they use the app, and it works. It works unbelievably
So it is
well.
still really relational then.
It's completely relational.
Yeah.
And so what it did was, so Nick Begley, who did it with me, what it is, it's the actionable things in my book that we make possible in the app. So a book people read and they kind of feel it and they cry and they can see themselves in it. But it's really hard to make you do stuff that's in a book. Whereas everything I say in the book, like the pillars of strength or feeling the pain, how you heal in grief is allow yourself to feel the pain. So there's a session in the app. I ask them to imagine the pain. What does it look like? Where do they feel it in their body? What's the worst part of the pain? Describe it. And that you would never do in a book. So I don't, a lot of different people have asked me to do workbooks. I think workbooks work a little bit, but not really. I think apps, which are live and changing, because we have grief chat in the app. People can talk to a grief counsellor every day, any day. So it's very relational, active, and actioning.
I think that's really important. And I was going to say, obviously we're what I wanted to ask you, what would you say, like, obviously having myself experienced loss certainly last year, and it's not the first kind of Christmas that's coming now, it's the second one, but I found that those first are really hard. But is there something, or are there, if you had your top 3 actionable things that people could do over difficult periods like Christmas or birthdays or whatever, what would you recommend?
Well, first of all, the awareness that it's going to be difficult, but don't just aware of it like sort of, dread music in your body. Kind of recognize, okay, this is going to be difficult. So what do I need? You probably need to talk to your family or whoever you're sharing Christmas with, and don't do it on WhatsApp. Do it on a call where you can see each other and work out, look, this is going to be difficult. Dad has died. How are we going to do it? Do we want to do Christmas? Do we want to do the same traditions? Do we want to do different traditions? And how are we going to represent Dad? So the other thing is the presence of absence, because Christmas, things like that, the memories are so much more embedded than every kind of, today is like the 8th of December, but you can't remember an 8th of December. We do remember accumulated embodied Christmases. And so Christmases in the mind are like time machines through sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. So every Christmas throws you back to the Christmases when the person was very present. So you have to make visible what is invisible. Grief is so invisible. When you make it visible and you say their name, you light a candle for them, you maybe do a ritual that you can read a poem, or if you have faith or it's significant, you can go to a place of worship, or you wear something of theirs, you cook their Christmas turkey. I talk about when the person dies, the task of mourning is facing the reality of the loss, but recognizing the love and connection to them never dies. So the love continues. It shapes you. It influences you. It is with you forever. So use those touchstones to connect to the person. So thinking about Christmas with your dad, like what would what would most represent your dad at Christmas?
So he always, there was, obviously he's Swedish, so there's a number of specific Swedish traditions that we always had on Christmas Eve, for example. We had the Swedish Christmas meal, and so there are a number of things, like I've got the Swedish candles and etc. that I personally, but also with my sister this year, will do again. But I had the idea of talking about it before it happens, as you said, not on WhatsApp. So I'll make sure I do that, not on WhatsApp, is a good one, because I don't know. I mean, I know she'll do those traditions. We all do. Everyone in my family, we all feel that Swedish connection through him. And last year was interesting because last year we completely broke tradition of anything that we'd ever done before. So we didn't do it at, our family house or my sister's house, where we'd done it the previous Christmases with my dad, but we did do it in his house in Dartmouth, but it was somewhere we'd never done it with him. So it was the house felt very much his, yet we'd never actually had that embodied memory of having a Christmas there. So the whole family got together. So I think it was a really perfect place to do it last year.
Clever, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually clever. I mean, if I had a third suggestion, it would be give yourself time out that you can feel emotionally kind of overwhelmed very, very quickly. So just be aware of your somatically of your body. So don't kind of sit and endure it. Like, take a breath, go outside, walk around outside, go and get a glass of water, breathe, have a break. And also, I think, to put time aside to remember your person, whether that's, a prayer or going to the grave or going for a walk or writing them a letter or a Christmas card or being with someone and talking about them, but actually connecting to them and remembering. Because that's, my parents' generation, very much like my childhood, was forget and move on. And what we know is in grief that you need to feel the pain, but remember and connect so that you keep the memories alive. Otherwise, they die twice. They died when they died, and then they die because they're not talked about.
I think that's really important. And I think my cousin died by suicide about 6 years ago. And what I really noticed is that his mother really talks about him a lot and everything, but my other cousin really just didn't for years, just wouldn't mention him. We couldn't, and all of his friends and everyone in his life just felt like they couldn't. We were all walking on eggshells the whole time, and I actually created a breakdown for Max eventually, because he just couldn't, like, it was he needs to
building.
Yeah, and he just hadn't grieved him, it hadn't, because he just literally died, and then it was like he's gone and never again. He wasn't part of my life. I mean, he obviously was massively a part of his life, the most important part of his life, but he just couldn't face that grief and couldn't face that pain. And I think, yeah, that's what. And now all of his friends, when he had the breakdown, I think all of his friends kind of said, "No more. We're going to talk about Ted to you. We want to talk about this person who is so important to all of our lives," And I think that's been.
Was that his brother?
Ted was his brother. They were less than a year apart, and they shared a room all their lives. They were basically they were like twins.
Twins, Irish twins.
Yeah.
And I think often I think what's interesting, I mean, it's obviously devastating for your cousin, but often siblings are the invisible mourners, because the parents get a lot of the legitimate grief. And so a sibling often doesn't legitimize themselves, and they feel they have to support the parents. They have to live life for themselves and for the sibling that died. But also they can be furious with them, particularly around a complex death like suicide. So that it's so many competing, really intense, really difficult emotions that are terrifying. So, I mean, I can completely understand that he had to kind of push them away, because he was terrified if he put one foot in, he'd break down. But of course, the paradox of grief is that things that you do to block the pain are the things that do you harm over time. And so,
And you spoke so eloquently about the conditions for effective grieving. I think that's my big takeaway is like providing the environment, the permission, the space, the tools, the community, and the connection to be able to relate to that grief, because there is no avoiding it. There is no changing it. That is yeah.
and that we move in and out of it. It's a dual process. It's not like you have to kind of jump into the pain and stay there forever. It's, people talk about with children's grief, it's like jumping in and out of puddles. You jump in the puddle and feel very sad, and jump out of the puddle and hit your sister and steal her chocolate and roar with laughter. But actually, I think as adults, we're like children. So we feel very young when we're grieving. We feel very vulnerable, like all the skin has been taken off us, and we feel kind of scared, and we want a parent to come and fix it, or somebody to come and magic it okay. But actually, if you learn that you can have this dual process where you're loss-oriented and you feel and emote and grieve, and then intentionally you're restorative, where you have a break from the grief, you see friends, you anesthetize against the pain, you stay busy, and you move between the two. That's how incrementally you adjust.
You said something very similar like that at Oxford a couple of years ago, I think it was, or maybe it was last year, and that was a really
very repetitive.
Important. No, it was really important to me to hear that, and I'm really glad you said it again now, is this idea that you have permission to do the restorative things for yourself, whatever that looks like. And it can be going out with friends, it can be going for a walk, it can be just sitting in bed if you need to, whatever it is, that you give yourself permission to do that. But also, you also mentioned that going out, moving your body, there are certain things that we need to do, yeah, and it's really important that we don't not have those kind of, whether that's get fresh air, move, walk, whatever it is.
Grief is so embodied. And of course, grief is a form of learning. You're updating your brain. So if you look at all the sort of science and the neuroscience around grief, it's literally telling your brain, this person is no longer here. It's updating your brain. And pain is the agent of change. Pain is the thing that you're telling your brain they're not here, when you kind of want to pick up the phone and call them, or suddenly want to kind of see them, and then you're hit by the pain of it, or by something that's for 4 and you're now 3. That shock, every time you do that, incrementally your brain updates, and then over time you accommodate it and you build your life around it.
I just love that you're walking that in. That is the beauty of this conversation, is the insight, those levels of insight, and then the practical ability to do something about it. Because we often like sit in conversations that are so insightful, or that are so kind of practical, and that ability to kind of traverse those two spaces, because ultimately everybody experiences this, and yet we're also woefully and inadequately equipped with understanding or tools, because it's still a big taboo.
I mean, I'm doing it. I mean, this isn't for the pod, so your editor can cut this. But tomorrow I'm doing a talk which is launching the Bristol Research Centre for Grief. And one of the things I say is that 600,000 people die a year. 3 million people will then be bereaved, because at least it affects at least 3 people. 42% of people say, I don't know how to start a conversation about grief.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
And hang on, I've got the stat here. Have I got it the right way around? Hang on a minute. 36%. So 32% of adults don't know how to begin a conversation with someone who's been bereaved. And 42% of bereaved people who want formal support don't receive it.
Yeah, I completely get that. I mean, I think it was so, when Ted died specifically, more than my dad, even though my dad was young he was still a grandfather, it's different. It's different.
It's not a death out of time.
No, when Teddy was 22 years old, I just, it was like, I just no one know, I
Devastating.
didn't, no one knew how, no one knew how to speak about it, no one knew, I didn't know how to speak about it, and that's just like, you don't, what do you do? And I think I do, it's what the one thing someone did tell me is just talk about him all the time, whenever you can, whenever you want to talk about him, bring memories back into, bring him, keep him there. And that was, I think, important. But it's hard because as well, someone died by suicide, it's like, there, as you say, this is so complicated. There's so many complex emotions around it. Like there's a lot of, and even within my own family, there was so much. Some people were really angry, but then other people were really angry at them being angry because they were like, "Well, you can't be angry." It was so difficult.
And that's one, that's the thing I think I talked about. Was it the year before last? Was in families grieving, transgenerational patterns of trauma and how a suicide like your cousin, unless someone within the family system changes how they respond, that those that, pain that isn't resolved in one generation gets passed down to the next generation. But also everyone in a family will grieve differently. So learning how to communicate openly to allow the differences. There isn't a right way or a wrong way. There isn't a hierarchy if one is is more legitimate to grieve than another one. That finding ways of connecting and being with each other, even when the unbearable has happened, is how you survive it. Because really only you as a family know how bad it is, and know what the level of pain is. And if you can support each other, that is transformative. And most often in traumatic things like that, families pull apart rather than pull together, unfortunately.
Incredible. Great conversation, Julia. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm conscious of time and
Sorry,
needing
I
to.
banged on.
No, it's
Sorry.
okay.
It's fantastic. It was a real, as Emma said, like it's the insight plus the actionable things, which I think is where I really want to talk about the app, because I think that's what you have been able to create, and I think it is so important that it is accessible for so many people. Like you just said, this number of people who don't know how to talk about grief, who don't know how to deal with it themselves, and who haven't got necessarily access to resources like therapists who can help them and hold them through those.
Or afford them.